Hi, my name's Liz Barclay, and I'm here to talk to you about listening skills. We'll be talking about listening skills for students in elementary and high school. And it's a very broad topic, so we'll just be touching on most important aspects of listening skills. But you can find out a lot more in a book entitled Learning to Listen and Listening to Learn. This is a book that was written a number of years ago. I'm the editor, and written by a group of authors, all who are interested in the development of listening skills for our very diverse population of students with visual impairments. You'll find chapters that talk about kids in early elementary school, in preschool, in students with multiple disabilities, specifically students with speech language challenges, children who are deafblind, children who are second language learners, all around the topic of listening skills and how do we assess and teach listening skills. So right now, we're going to delve into specifically children in elementary school and middle school and high school. Okay, we're talking about listening skills and specifically tools for elementary and high school age students. And here is a picture of a young lady at the high school level. And she is a student with visual impairment and multiple disabilities. And she really utilized listening skills to a very high level throughout her school life. She is sitting now in front of a computer listening to text from the screen of her computer with utilizing OCR software. And she really participated in her curriculum at a high level through listening skills because this was her strongest learning modality. And so I think she's a great person to show for some of these skills. When we talk about listening skills, we are really, I would like you to think of listening skills as a part of literacy skills and a very integral part of literacy skills. Listening isn't taking the place of reading, but all kids really flourish in literacy skills if they have excellent listening skills support, when they have excellent listening skills. And these skills really support the development of listening skills, literacy skills. For many students with visual impairments, listening skills will be essential to them, especially when they're entering middle and high school. And you think, of course, everybody needs great listening skills, but our students with visual impairment, they really, they do well when they have very well-developed listening skills. So I'm not talking about just listening to a book for recreational reading. I'm talking about very, very well-developed listening skills using a variety of technology tools and coming with that knowledge of this is when I can use these skills, this is when it's appropriate for me as a student to use these skills and to really know that that's what they are doing very deliberately. I worked with kids throughout my career of all ages, and now I'm working with adults with low vision, and most of those adults with low vision have been strong readers for most of their lives, and now they're having much more difficulty with the actual physical reading task because they have visual impairment that keeps them from reading in the very comfortable way that they used to before. And so some of those adults, it's very interesting to me, some of really embrace the idea of listening to a book that's been recorded digitally or recorded with by a person, and some of them just can't even think of that. And I always think that this has a lot to do with are these people very visual people, naturally speaking, or are they able to use their auditory skills, their listening skills? Are they flexible in that way? And so oftentimes I will have to work with them to really help them start bit by bit to learn to listen to things for pleasure so that they can still get the pleasure from this literacy skill that they have that they're no longer able to use. And so it's very intertwined, very, very important. There's a strong correlation between listening comprehension and reading comprehension. When you're working with young students to help them develop their listening comprehension, you're also building the foundation for reading comprehension. When you think of young children and the variety of books that many of them hear as their first learning when they're preschoolers, and parents read to them and talk to them about things that are around them and in their lives, they're building at that very early stage their comprehension for language, their listening comprehension, and this lays the foundation later for their reading comprehension. And it's very, very important that when we're working with very young children to keep this in mind, that when we work with this listening skill, we're building the foundation for their reading comprehension. When we years and years ago, when the ABC literacy project took place, our children who were blind and who were early Braille readers, they did very well during the first few years of the study. When they were first learning to read, they were making progress with their peers in their classrooms who did not have visual impairment. But the area where they started to fall down eventually, it was right around the third grade, in the area of vocabulary. Vocabulary development starts to happen when children are very young. We build the foundation as we're building understanding by explaining things to children, giving them experiences, giving them objects to touch that go hand in hand with the words that they're hearing, that they're listening to, and we build this strong foundation of listening comprehension and reading comprehension. As kids become, more and more sophisticated in what they're reading and what's under their fingertips as Braille learners, they are not receiving the same amount of vocabulary. They're not working at the same speed as their peers, their same age peers in third and fourth grade, because they're having a harder time keeping up. And so we decided, and we found through the study, that these kids really needed extra help in making sure that they had adequate vocabulary development. And that's all tied to listening comprehension. In elementary school, it starts out very early, certainly in preschool, and then in early elementary school. Our focus around listening is about the things that happen in the classroom. As a teacher of students with visual impairments, the best thing, the most valuable thing that you can do in addition to hands-on teaching is to be an active member in a classroom for a young student, especially a student who has no vision, a student who is blind, to be in and out of that classroom as much as possible. possible, so that as the teacher of the visually impaired, you can observe the activities where you see your student, and you'll know where you can support. This is what you've been learning in the program: observation and pushing into the classroom, in addition to the actual skill development, so that you can understand where it is that you need to add that support. And with regard to listening skill development, two very, very important things that happen in the classroom that you'll observe is certainly the circle time activities. And for better, for worse, they're in almost every kindergarten and first grade, and sometimes even into second grade classrooms. They'll have circle time activities. And where at the very beginning in kindergarten and maybe first grade, it would be a daily appearance with sitting, on an actual rug in a circle around the teacher. Those activities, as kids go into second grade, maybe they might not have a circle time, a regular schedule, but they have many things that happen down there on that rug, in small groups and in large groups. And so watching our kids during that time, our students as teachers of the visually impaired, we want to really see, okay, what happens? What are the activities that happen during circle time? Usually there's a calendar, usually there's counting, usually there's some word activities, word work, and so on. And oftentimes there's sharing. So the circle time activities can either be fascinating and informative to our students, or they can be very frustrating and confusing and a time for them to check out. And I've certainly seen both things happen. When our students cannot fully participate and they can't make meaning of some of the things that are happening in maybe a fast-paced circle time, they make their own entertainment. And I'm sure many of you have seen this, where kids just kind of zone out and start doing things to entertain themselves. They are very good at this. And so there are many things that we can do to help our students so that they aren't checked out, so that they are plugged in circle time. So first of all, observing circle time and observing it on a regular basis. And then second of all is to really collaborate with the classroom teacher and find out, okay, what is, usually there's a structure to circle time, and it's really a framework, and then some of the things change, but really there's generally this framework. And so finding out what is that framework, where can you provide, where can you provide accessible things for your student to have during circle time. If there are charts that kids look at on the wall, how can your student have their own personal chart? If there are numbers, does your student need an abacus to use during circle time to provide something hands-on, that they're getting that concept while the other kids are just looking at something on the board? If there are objects that children bring into the classroom, making sure that your student is always seated in a place in the circle time so that they have easy access to those objects and to the things that come around, and that they have enough time to fully explore them and to know what they are that they have in their hands. Because all of these things, all of these props, so to speak, support children's understanding, and our children need to be able to access them too. Another thing to teach children for preparation for circle time is how do they participate? What happens when the teacher asks the question to all of the students? What does it feel like when the student is raising their hand, practicing hand raising in your time with your students so that they understand, okay, when the teacher asks what happened in the story next, okay, what can you do so that the teacher knows that you're the person that has the answer to that question, teaching them how to raise their hand, how to turn their bodies towards the teacher's voice, and how to make sure that if there is an instructional assistant that is there working with your child or your student, that they're not constantly talking to the instructional assistant, and the instructional assistant is not constantly talking to that child, so that they know that it's their job during circle time to listen to the classroom teacher and the other students when they're taking their turns as well. These are all things that you can do to help boost the comprehension and the participation in everyday circle time activities. Let's talk a little bit about reading the classroom, the read aloud, because one of the activities that almost always happens during circle time is a teacher read aloud. So our students, enjoy being read to just like anyone else. But we all know that our kids need different things to make sure that they really fully participate in what is being read aloud to them. And when children are young, during first and second grade, kindergarten, they often have daily or several times a week, a teacher is reading a picture book aloud to the whole group. And so there are a lot of things that you can do to help make sure that the student that you're serving can really understand what's going on in that book. And later on, you may, if you go to any picture book and leaf through that book and start looking at all of the different pictures that boost comprehension for children with vision, you start to understand, okay, this is my work here, this is what I need to do. How do we make these pictures that are really supporting comprehension for students work for our students as well? And so there are a number of ways to do this. You can either have copies of books that are being read to children aloud in the classroom, or you can use those books after stories have been read to the group of students. But the most important thing is that children really understand what's going on in those stories, because that is how comprehension builds. And when you start to think that children hear these books both at home and in school day after day after day, we want to make sure that they truly understand what they're hearing, what they're listening to. So here are some guidelines for enhancing listening comprehension when children are hearing a book that's being read aloud to them. And the first thing is that we want to look at the book with our students and provide a picture walk, so to speak, describing a lot of the features, the important features of the book as they relate to the new concepts and experiences of the story. And, you can't obviously describe every single thing on each page, but once you know a story, okay, what is important to that story. Whenever it's possible, if you can bring in objects that can be shown to your student that help support comprehension, maybe objects that are featured in the story. Right now it's October. I'm sure there's going to be lots of stories about pumpkins. And so having a pumpkin for your student to touch and hold on to as a book about pumpkins is being read. If a book is about hats and the variety of hats there are, bringing in several types of hats and so on. And then relating the information that's shown in the pictures to concepts in a child's own experiences. Every time you can say to a child, okay, this is a story about many cats, and you have a cat at your house, don't you? Why don't you tell me a little bit about your cat? Is your cat soft, or does your cat like it when you hold your cat? And things like this that really bring that concept to the child's own experience whenever it's possible, so that they can link a new concept that's going to be developed in a story to something that they already know, something they've already had hands-on experience with. So another thing that can help our children, because just a quick read through that they get in the classroom is probably not going to be enough. If we can provide opportunities for repeated listening, so rereading a story. I know that my son, when he was young, we had a book. We had books that we read, of course, every day and every night, but there was this one book, Gus the Friendly Ghost. It was the dorkiest book. I read that book probably 20 times because he liked it, and he always had more questions about Gus the Friendly Ghost. And that's how children learn, and that's how they sort things out. And our students really need experiences that can be repeated many times, so that they have different ways of looking at it. They can ask different questions. So providing opportunities for repeated listening and questioning, and we can probe for their understanding as we're reading along to our students. And so maybe this is not something that you're going to be able to do on a regular basis as a TVI, but if a student is being served by a paraprofessional teaching assistant, giving them setting aside time where they can go through this process of rereading and then questioning and asking some good comprehension questions along the way. For students who can view pictures, it's really a great thing whenever you can provide them their own copy of a book when the teacher is sitting in front of the circle reading aloud. And that way they can be viewing the picture at the optimal distance for their vision. And if there's somebody working with them, as the teacher's reading, if they can be pointing things out that the teacher is referring to. This is not always the case, it's not always possible, but when an extra copy isn't available, to make sure to provide enough time that student can sit with that book after it's been read, to look at the pictures again, to point out the salient features. And you'll be surprised at how often children, especially children who have very low vision, misinterpret pictures due to their visual impairment. And so making sure that those details are very clear and that they truly understand what's going on in that picture that supports the language that's been read to them. And now we're going to take a little jump to thinking about teaching our students how to listen to recorded information. We're starting with, okay, how do we build our comprehension in the classroom with activities and with literature and things that happen in the classroom? But alongside that, we need to be teaching our students how to, from a very early age, learn how to use the technology that's available to them to listen to books that have been recorded. So kindergarten and first grade levels is not too early to introduce students to digital listening devices. Now, parents may say, but at home, I really prefer to read books to my child because That's a time that we share, and I don't want to give that up. And I'm not saying that families should give up um, reading to their children. They should be doing it just as much, if not more. But in tandem with that, we really want to help our students become very comfortable listening to recorded information, because this is going to be a very important tool for their toolbox as they progress through school. So the kindergarten, first grade level, that's when you start out with, of course, just some of the same pleasurable and recreational books, both in fiction and nonfiction, that aren't they're not chapter books. These are some of the same things that they're listening to in the classroom. So sitting down with our students, and this is, again, a place where we're teaching our students this listening / literacy skill. We sit down with them and we share this experience, and parents can do the same thing. And if you can encourage parents to occasionally make their reading together, sitting down and listening to a book together on an APH recorder or talking book library digital recorder. This is we're building the foundation for this type of listening skill. The listening to recorded information that our kids really need to learn. So choose a wide variety of fiction and nonfiction books and listen together and we need to teach our students how to use this very simple technology and work with them on building the listening comprehension skill in tandem with teaching them how to do this. So when we're listening together with our students, it's important to stop or pause regularly and to discuss what we've just listened to, and to ask questions for comprehension. If you have a recording and a picture book for a student with low vision, so much the better. Use them together. So at this stage, children really enjoy this shared listening experience, and they're much more likely to listen to a book that's been recorded if they are given the experience to share with you many times. And then eventually they'll pick it up and understand and learn to enjoy just doing it by themselves in their downtime. So, but even at this early age, where we're just introducing the technology and working on the comprehension, we do want to deliberately work on the comprehension piece, because we want them to really start to learn what's important about this story. What are some of the main ideas of this story? Who are the characters of this story? How do they feel about what happened during the story? All of these questions, we really want our students to start thinking about these things as they're listening to literature. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about once we get into second grade through sixth grade, we want to continue this process. We want to, at this point, be working on skills such as emphasizing the main idea. We want to emphasize what are the important details that our students are listening to. And what is paraphrasing? Can you tell me what happened? Can you tell me what happened in one sentence? What's the most important thing that just happened? Because paraphrasing and listening to the most important information is a skill that begins at this early age, and it really helps set our students up for much more complex listening as they progress through school and they start listening to lectures in high school. So at this age, we want to have our students begin to listen to chapter books. And but it's very important to help our students choose literature that is at their listening comprehension level. And so a very good way to do this is to know what the reading comprehension level is. So most of our students will be in mainstream programs, and their classroom teachers, and working with them, we probably do have a sense of the reading comprehension level, or the reading grade level. If we don't, the best way to get that information is through assessment. Assessment that you will participate in. If they don't, if our students don't participate in the assessment process in the classroom, and we're primarily providing reading instruction, then, or we really have questions about their reading comprehension, either print or braille, we're going to be using tools to assess those skills, such as the Basic Reading Inventory by Jerry Johns. It's an example of a reading inventory that you'll be learning about in the assessment class, or maybe you already have. That same tool can be used to assess the listening comprehension level. First of all, find out what is the reading level. If it's very low, we want to use the alternate passages of the same tool that we're using for reading comprehension, read passages to our students from that tool, and have them answer comprehension questions, giving us an approximate listening comprehension level, grade level. And so that will guide us in choosing the literature that we're encouraging our students to pick, so that they're picking something that's at a good level to help continue to build listening comprehension. So when we're working on this process with our students, especially if our students need some extra support in this area of really regularly listening, in addition to all of the reading and everything else that they're doing, we will sit down and listen to them with them to a chapter book, stopping after 1 or 2 pages to check for student comprehension, asking them questions about some of the details that they've been listening to, the main idea, and paraphrasing, using these 3 areas to check comprehension. Eventually, students should be able to listen to a whole chapter before answering the comprehension questions. And so you build up to this. It can take a while to build this skill, and it's a very important skill, because this, again, is preparing them for learning how to listen to a nonfiction chapter in their history book or their science book when they get into middle and high school, which they will very much need. It's important to diversify, help your students diversify in terms of the literature that they're listening to. Yes, it's great for them to listen to nonfiction, to fiction literature for enjoyment and to be able to build those skills. But during these later years, especially in 5th and 6th grade, encouraging them to listen to books about nonfiction, maybe something of a scientific nature, something that has that's about some aspect of history that they're very interested in, just to start building that skill of listening to things that are nonfiction. It's very important. Okay, so we're going to take a big jump now to middle school and high school. And we have our same student. She's there again in front of all of her listening devices. And our emphasis in this section is about listening to acquire information. And of course, all of our students from early ages are listening. They're building towards the skill of listening to acquire information. But as we jump into middle school and high school, it's even more so. Students are doing a lot of listening in the classroom. So we need to deliberately help them learn note-taking skills while they're listening. And we need to help them further develop their audio formatted listening or listening to recorded information, textbook chapters, as we discussed earlier. And they will, in these years, they're going to be learning a great deal about listening technology, as well as learning how to listen or to arrange for listening to a live reader. And so those are the topics that I'll touch on right now. Okay, so before we kind of dive into these areas, I would like to share with you a little bit of video of 3 students at the California School for the Blind. They're a group of students who I worked with just a little bit as they were transitioning into their high school classes. And they needed some specific work about listening skills in the classroom and note-taking skills. And so I thought it might be fun for you just to hear a little bit of their discussion of their classroom experience. They're in a mainstream classroom. It's a health class. And I was just taking the opportunity to ask them questions about some of the listening that they were doing in that class. So we'll listen to about 10 minutes of their comments. Okay, so we're going to talk about listening skills. And thank you for coming and talking with me about this.
You're welcome.
And we talked about listening skills before you started going to your high school health class to kind of get you ready to start doing that again, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes.
And as you've been working with that health class, have you been trying any of the techniques that we talked about?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Can you tell me a little bit more? Would one of you like to tell me, first of all, what your class is about?
Our class is about like it's like all about how do I explain health? It's well, okay. I mean, she has to cram a lot of stuff. It's about 9 weeks of an 18-week curriculum, so she has to cram it into about half. And so, like a couple weeks ago, we studied bullying, depression, and suicide. The next week, we studied nutrition and eating disorders like anorexia, bulimia, and binge eating disorder. And just like for the last couple of days, we've been talking about cigarettes and alcohol and what it can do to your body and all that.
So it's a general health class.
Yeah. Well, and some parts of it, I have to admit, are pretty like intense, emotional. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And Jasmine, how often does your teacher give you lectures where you need to take notes?
I'd have to say probably once or twice a week or just about every other day. But that's kind of, she'll like, read it out and she'll say like this is on the text. You need to take notes. But I usually just take notes on whatever I think is important.
And Alana, do you sometimes have small group activities where you have to do some note taking? Where you work in groups of maybe 4 or 5 students?
We used to do like some worksheets and some like activities, like experiments.
No, so you do have experiments, or you?
Yeah, we don't really have to take notes now.
Yeah, well, like basically, like she might split us into groups of like 4 or 5 or something like that. Like today, we kind of split up into groups and we put on these like special goggles and went outside, and they were basically like drunk simulation, like what it's like to be drunk. And we tossed around a beanbag. I was having a lot of trouble. If you would have seen me, you would have laughed. I can promise you, you would have laughed your head off, because I was like stumbling. I was trying to find the beanbag, and I'm like,
Oh my gosh! And that was when you had those simulators.
Yes.
So did you have to use a lot of? When you're working in those small groups, do you have to use your listening skills at that time? Jasmine, you look like you're.
Yeah, I was gonna say something. Not in particular today, but I do remember that one day we had to do food labeling.
Oh yeah.
And that was one that you had to listen for skills. Like, okay, well, how much carbs does this have? What is the best?
How many calories and stuff?
Yeah, and what is just kind of take notes on it, and like one of the group members had to say what they think is the highest, or what do you think is the unhealthiest and why, and what do you think is the healthiest and why. And I think we had to use our listening skills to find out what is what's really important.
Yeah, and like we were like Elena and I both had macaroni and cheese. I had the Stouffer brand, but she had the Kraft brand. And we actually did not notice that my food label was like all the stuff on it was twice the size of hers. So in the end, I think that we said that the Elena's macaroni and cheese was the unhealthiest because mine was 2 servings and hers was just 1 serving.
Oh, a little tricky bit of information there. So, how often, Elena, are you in the habit of taking notes?
Yeah, we take notes like twice a week, and like her lectures.
And what do you use for note taking?
My braille note.
And Jasmine, how about you?
Usually my braille note is the best thing because it's kind of shortcut. Like you can use contracted braille, and kind of a little bit better.
Braille, it's handy for that. And how about you, Jenna?
I use my laptop.
So you have a laptop computer?
Yes, and sadly, I have to type out every letter. A, H, J, and they can just like type H, and they immediately have like word hat.
Well, could you do that for your own personal notes, since you know that H is hat?
Well, I could, but for me, like if she writes something on the board, I want to copy it down exactly.
Oh, exactly. Is it important to copy the word have exactly if they are notes for you?
No, but like this one time, we actually had to turn in our notes. I can't remember why. So yeah.
If that during something something like that, you would want it to be more exact. But what did we? So I think that's where we'll stop. Okay, so I just thought it would be nice to have a little break to see some actual kids in action, and I think they gave us a little bit of food for thought. It's interesting to hear, first of all, what's going on in a classroom, but also their awareness of their note-taking in the classroom. And also to show you what comes out of a group situation when you can get a couple of peers talking about some of these skills that take place in the classroom, some brainstorming. Anytime you can get one or two kids together, one of your students in another classroom, a student in their classroom, to talk about, what are some of the things, the techniques that they use during note taking. When are they taking notes? When are they having to listen for information, to keep this idea up front and center as a learning strategy for them. So with that in mind, we're going to talk about some of the tools and techniques for listening comprehension and listening skill development in middle school and high school. And certainly, oops. So first of all, I just want to speak briefly about optical character recognition. And you're all using this very important tool for, for teaching our students. And optical character recognition is either a standalone device or software that's added to a PC, and it converts printed text to speech output with options for both Braille and large print output. So it's just like a treasure trove for us. And we start working with our students in elementary school, but in middle school and high school, it is definitely one of their main tools. Screen readers use optical character recognition, and they provide audio feedback for navigation of the computer screen content. And you can see this picture of the student, and that's exactly what he's doing. He's not in the classroom, he's in a resource room, but he's got his headphones, his headset, and he's using a screen reader as on the computer. And he can do this in the classroom also with his headset so that he doesn't disturb other students. Using screen readers, a student can listen to menus, controls, and text-based applications. Certainly, they can use PowerPoint, Excel, and database with books, internet, email, you name it, and screen readers are a very, very important tool for these functions. And they're just a very essential component for computer access using tools such as JAWS and Zoom Text Fusion now, as well as other tools, other programs. So we're very lucky to have them. When students are listening to things that have been recorded, the term that we use is audio formatted listening. And it's just a very fancy way of saying that they're using their personal computers, their phones, their Braille note takers, their book ports to listen to literature that has been recorded. And so there are so many options now for our students, but I think that the most common tool that's being used right now in the classrooms, in addition to iPhones and personal computers, are tablets. And devices are used because they can use speech output for navigation. They can access all applications, and they can listen to their textbooks, all using tablet devices. And we're seeing them more and more in classrooms. Students are much more willing to use this mainstream type of tool for most all of their learning in the classroom. And it's a very leveling device in terms of it's a tool that many of their classmates are using. It's much more portable, more discreet. It can be travel from classroom to classroom as kids get older. And so these devices can be used as an electronic magnification device, showing things that are on the board with an external camera, but using optical character recognition and speech output, students can do so much of their coursework using tablets. A great example of a program that kids can use the tablet with is a program that you'll be hearing about in another lecture called Voice Stream Reader. So when our students are looking at a story that's been downloaded, maybe a chapter of their textbook chapter that they've gotten through Bookshare, they can, if they have vision, they can use the print that can be produced in the size and the contrast that that is the best for them. And as the words are being spoken by the optical character recognition, each word is being highlighted. So for instance, this is a picture of a screen of Voice Stream Reader, and the word being voiced is surrounding. This is very, very important for especially print readers who are having some difficulty learning print reading, because they have they're getting the auditory output, they're looking at the word and it's being highlighted as it's being voiced. So they can stop the computer, they can stop the reading at any time on any given word to really study that word. And they're getting the visual as well as the auditory at the same time. It's a very powerful tool. Voice Stream Reader is oftentimes used with books and recordings from Bookshare.org, which is part of the National Library Service, starting out with talking books, and then as students progress and start needing textbooks, they transfer over to Bookshare. And so they can use Bookshare and use the optical character recognition for listening. They can have production of Braille as well as large print. So it's a wonderful, very, very rich tool that our students are able to use. So when we're talking about building the essential skills for listening to recorded information, just as we were doing in early elementary school, as students progress through middle and high school, we're now really, again, listening with them for a while as we introduce the recorded textbooks, because you really can't just hand the student the book and the recording and say, go to it. We really have to, again, take a step back, focus on, the comprehension piece as our students are learning to this new skill. They're building on their skill of listening to recorded information, and now as they're listening to grade level textbooks and textbook chapters, this kind of ups the ante for them. And so we're working with them, choosing maybe a book such as a social studies book, and we're starting with the same process of listening with them to a paragraph and then stopping to ask questions and have a little discussion, talking about the important details and the main idea. At this level, we hope that our students' skills are built so that they really know what to do with this information after they've listened to it. But if they don't, we stay with this process with them for a little while to help them build the skill. We're going to then increase the listening to a section of the chapter at a time before answering asking the comprehension questions for them to answer at the end of each section, and so on, and helping them to build that attention to the listening that they will need in order to take the important information from what they have heard. I want to take just a minute to talk about how important this skill is. Again, our students, especially students with low vision, they oftentimes suffer from visual fatigue. Their causes of visual impairment they cause them to have difficulty using their visual systems for very extended periods of time. Also, they're more often looking at screens than their classmates. Their classmates can pick up a book and access that print pretty easily, where our students are oftentimes using screens in order to access their print. And so this also contributes to visual fatigue. The glare issues, sustaining visual attention, all of these things mean that our students are not having as much access as quickly as they need to simply by reading text or reading a screen. And so building this skill of listening, the way we've been talking about, starting at a very early age and then continuing on in early elementary and then now at the high school level, we're really helping them build a strong skill. It's a real gift that we can give as teachers to pay attention to this type of listening. So some of the skills that we need to really focus on once we feel that our students are gaining the information from what they're listening to and they're starting to be able to take notes as they listen and pull out important information, we want to work with our students on increasing the speech rates. Many of our students, not all of them, but many of them will be able to start increasing the listening rate so that they can listen to things at a compressed speech. I once had a student when I was teaching at Skyline High School in Oakland, and he had a Braille note. At that time, it was, I think it was called Braille and Speak. That was the first Braille note-taking device. And he would, he was highly skilled, a really smart kid, but he would listen to his Braille and Speak at such a rate that I could only pick out maybe 2-3 words for every paragraph that I was hearing inside the resource room. And one time I said to him, Jason, do you understand all of that? I wanted to know what he was taking away from it. And he said, are you kidding? This is my brother. And that he was referring to his Braille and Speak as his brother. He was indeed listening at a very fast rate. And if you talk to very successful people who are blind, who regularly listen, they are listening at very compressed levels, and they're able to really take away even more because of that. It really keeps their listening and their intellect aroused, and they can do it. So listening rate, of course, may need to be adjusted depending on the type of material that the student is listening to. So if you're working on increasing reading rates, perhaps listening to a literature section would be the way to start it, and see what your student can do and what your student can pull from that information. So there are different types of listening, and just as there are different types of reading. And so reading a science text might be much slower and more deliberate, where reading something such as literature might be something that they could increase listening rates or reading speech rates. And For some students, we're going to be encouraging them to follow along in print or braille as they listen. And again, this depends on the type of topic that you're working on. And as you're working with your students, as they are working on some of their curricular tasks, you'll know when it's important. When students are learning to read and they're having difficulty learning to read, that might be a time to have them listen at sometimes as they're following along in print or braille and using a tool such as the one that we just discussed. So as you get to know your students, you'll know what is the most appropriate. The phone is an ever more important tool all the time for our students. Many of our students will be using the phone as a listening device as they're listening to digital recordings with earbuds and their phone. It's very convenient. And so it's just another tool for them to listen during downtimes, maybe during a commute. Or other times when they're at home, they have access to their things that they need to listen to, and they have their phone apps that can allow them to do it. I just also wanted to point out a couple of other apps. You may know already about them, but if not, the KNFB Reader and Seeing AI are two apps that use OCR that can be loaded onto the phone to read both short and long text. And students can be trained about how to hold their phones in order to use these apps. And their kids love them, adults love them. The Seeing AI app is free. And KNFB Reader is $99. Some people feel that it does more than Seeing AI. If a student has an Android phone, the Seeing AI is called Envision AI, that you can right away download on your phone and play around with, and think about the access that you're giving your student when you teach them how to use these apps. Many of the adults who I work with take their phones into a restaurant and now use Seeing AI to listen to the choices on the menu. So you can use these things and teach them in very practical ways, but the listening technology is there and becoming more and more sophisticated all the time. I'm going to talk just a little bit more about note-taking and listening. You heard the young ladies talking about some of their note-taking and some mentioning the shorthand that the Braille users were able to use. Students, this is just a factoid, students typically recall only 50% of what they hear, and 20 to 30% of what is remembered is incorrect, and this is without note-taking. Once you start teaching your students to take notes, you're increasing those odds tremendously. And just as we all need, we're constantly, well, at least I am day to day writing notes to myself, working with my own personal calendar and writing all the information that I need in order to get me through my schedule. We too need to teach our students to learn how to take notes. And so at the high school level, sitting down with your students occasionally and talking with them about their note-taking, teaching students how to talking with them about listening for the main points. You've built some of this foundation as you've been working with them to listen to recorded information. And now, as they listen to their teachers in the classroom, you're helping them use some of these same skills. helping them to learn for listen for main points of the lectures, and that the notes should consist of keywords or phrases, and not every single word. Thinking about the importance of what is written down, and then going back to review notes. These are some of the important aspects of note taking that we want to make sure our students are doing. And then in addition to that, as students are in high school, we want to also teach them another important listening skill, and that's talking with them about once they transition from high school and perhaps are going into college, how are they going to find a live reader if they need to? How do they interview a live reader? What would be good qualities of somebody who was going to be a live reader, and how to hire someone who's a live reader. A way to help our students prepare for this might be to have them partner with a sighted friend for studying and practice this skill. And talking with them about how they are the director of this person. The reader is not choosing what to read, but they're the director. They're the person that has decided what needs to be read, what they want to pull from that literature, and so on. And helping them during this, transition time, usually junior and senior year in high school, research options for employing and paying high readers. So, for instance, will the Department of Rehabilitation provide funding for some use of a hired reader or note taker? And so on. So will they go to the school that they go to? Will there be disabled student services that will help them make the arrangement for a scribe or a live reader? So this is another listening skill that you, as a teacher of the visually impaired, can help your student prepare for their transition from school to college. So I'd like to end with a beautiful photograph of two little gals, young gals, at the edge of the ocean. This was a picture that was taken during a field trip, and both of these little girls are blind, and they're standing at the edge of the water and listening to the water as it rushes towards them. And so use your imagination about this very lovely experiential learning that they're having right now. And I'd like to also share with you and end with a quote by the author Stephen Kusisto, and this is from his book Eavesdropping, a memoir of blindness and listening. And he writes, "I have been lucky sometimes to find places where I could work by ear and pause for whole moments, receiving treasures of sound and sense." Thank you very much.